And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan. And on this podcast, we're going to continue talking about statutory and actual incidents. Actually, on a previous video, we talked about the statutory incidents, which was, in this case, shifting the supply curve up by the amount of the tax. We put a statutory incidence of $6 on the supplier, and that shifted the supply curve up by the amount of the tax. But the real question we want to deal with is this actual incidence. Who actually pays the tax? Whose bank account does the money actually come out of? So it is true that the producer has the legal obligation of mailing the money into the state, and that's why the supply curve shifted up by the amount of the tax. But the question now is, the real question is, who's actually going to pay the tax? So to think about that, we're going to use these numbers. Over here, and we're going to remember here that the tax is the vertical distance between the supply curves. That was the definition we talked about on the previous videos. So this vertical distance right here is the amount of the tax. So that means this. Here's what's happening here. So before the tax, it used to be that you would go to the store, whatever this product is, and you would buy the product at a price of P1, which we said, let's pretend that's $100. And the consumers would, the equilibrium quantity is the consumers would buy Q1 units of the good, however many that is. And then the government comes along and they set a tax equal to $6 per unit. The tax of $6 per unit will shift the supply curve up by the amount of the tax, so it's going to shift the supply curve up by 6. So that means that this vertical distance anywhere between the two supply curves will be equal to 6. So here's what happens. The price, when the tax is implemented, the price is going to get bid up as we move to the new equilibrium point. Here's the new equilibrium point right here. And at that new equilibrium point, the price is going to get bid up to P2. Let's pretend that's $103. So what used to happen is the customer used to go to the store and pay $100 for the product and go home. And now and by the way, the producer would collect the $100. The store would collect the $100, and that would be it. That'd be the end of the story. But now with the tax, what's going to happen is now the consumer's going to go to the store and he's going to buy fewer units of the good. He used to buy Q1, now he's only going to buy Q2 units, and he's going to pay a price of $103. So the consumer's going to pay a price of $103, and he's going to give that price, that $103, he's going to give that to the store, and he's going to walk home with the product. Now, that's not the end of the story, because the store now has $103. And what's the store going to do with $103? Well, remember, they have a statutory incidence. They have a legal obligation to mail the $6 per unit tax. They have to mail 6 of that dollars into the government. And so they sell the product for $103. They mail $6 into the government, and that leaves them with $97. That leaves them with $97. Okay? So let me say that again. First of all, remember this. My tax is set at $6 per unit. Okay, so I'm doing this. I'm creating this video in the state of Pennsylvania, and at the time that I'm doing this, the sales tax is actually 6%. But when you start talking percentages, this all gets unnecessarily complicated. So we're just doing our tax at $6 per unit. The $6 per unit tax, every unit that sells has to pay a $6 tax. That shifts the supply curve up by the amount of the tax, in this case up by $6. So this vertical distance from here to here is also $6. The vertical distance between the supply curves is $6. It used to be that before the tax, it used to be that the customer went to the store, they paid $100, they gave the store owner $100, and they went home with the product. Done. But now, because of the tax, the price of the good goes up to $103. So now the customer goes to the store, they pay $103 to the store for the product. So the customer pays $103, the store gets paid $103, and then but they're not done yet, because then they have to mail 6 of those dollars into the state of Pennsylvania or whatever the state happens to be, and so they are left with only 97. So the customer used to pay 100, now they pay 103. The store used to receive $100 for the product. Now they receive $103 for the product, but they only get to keep 97 of those dollars because they have to mail the other 6 into the state of Pennsylvania or whatever the government happens to be. And so as a result of this, when we start asking the question, who has the actual incidence, the way we want to think about it is this. The consumer is going to pay part of the tax in the form of paying a higher price. Okay, so the consumer is going to pay part of the tax. Even though the statutory incidence is entirely on the supplier, the consumer is still going to pay part of the tax in the form of now paying a higher price for the product. That is to say that the store is going to raise the price of the good to partially offset this tax that they have to pay. So the consumer is going to pay part of the tax in the form of a higher price. They used to pay $100 for the product, now they pay $103. But the producers are also going to pay part of the tax, and the producer is going to pay part of the tax in the form of keeping less. They used to get paid $100 and they kept $100. Now they get paid $103, but they only keep 97. They only keep 97. Now, listen to how I just described that. The customer paid $103, but the producer only kept 97 of those dollars. Where did those other $6 go? Those other $6, of course, went to the government. But also keep in mind, that's just the per unit. Okay? That's just the per unit. The total amount of tax collected by the government is going to be the per unit. That is to say, the tax per unit, that's this distance right here, which is equal to 6, multiplied by the number of units that are purchased. And the customer is going to buy Q2 units at this equilibrium. So to figure out the total amount of tax collected by the government, you take the per unit tax, which is $6, and you multiply that by the base of this rectangle, which is the number of units that the customer is going to buy. And so that just means you're going to take 6 times however many units, Q2, however many units that are being bought by the customer, and that's going to give you this area, and that area is the amount of the tax that is collected by the government. That is the amount of the tax collected by the government. And so now we can break this down into the actual incidence and who actually pays the tax, partially paid by the consumer and partially paid by the producer, and the in between going to the government. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That's enough on this video. We've talked about on a previous video the statutory incidence. We've now talked a little bit about the actual incidence, but we're going to get a little bit more into the full actual incidence and where all the money goes on this graph in a future video. All right, so thanks for joining me. This has been Mr. Hagan on another podcast, and we'll see you on the next Econ podcast.